It was a dark and stormy night, at least in New York City, it was. Uh, Hi, I'm Max Rudin, President and Publisher of Library of America, and welcome to LOA Live. Library of America is a nonprofit organization dedicated to publishing authoritative new volumes of great American writers and to keeping the many-voiced American literary tradition a vital part of our culture. We're grateful to our partners for the event this evening, the Charles M. Schulz Museum and Peanuts Worldwide Entertainment. A special welcome to Library of America fellows and members who support our mission. 70 years ago, a 4-panel comic strip debuted in 7 newspapers. It would become, in its 50-year run, probably the most popular and influential strip of all time, and possibly the longest story ever told by one human being. In the polarized 1960s and beyond, Peanuts was the one thing everyone seemed able to agree on, and it continues to resonate with millions of readers. Its mystery is how, with a minimum of line and incident and a small ensemble of quirky characters, Peanuts somehow manages to explore fundamental questions of happiness, friendship, disappointment, hope, resilience, and decency. Our point of departure this evening is this Library of America collection, the Peanuts Papers, Charlie Brown, Snoopy and the Gang, and the Meaning of Life. In this volume, 33 writers and artists reflect on the deeper resonances of Schulz's deceptively simple masterwork, its impact on their own lives and art, and on the broader culture. It is edited by Andrew Blauner, our moderator tonight. Andrew is the founder of Blauner Books Literary Agency and editor of 6 other anthologies in which gifted writers take on the Beatles, the Bible, Central Park, and other large subjects. Joining Andrew are 4 distinguished contributors to the collection. Sarah Boxer, widely published critic and contributing writer for The Atlantic, is the creator of 2 cartoon novels, In the Floyd Archives, based on Freud's case histories, and a sequel, Mother May I, and is editor of the anthology Ultimate Blogs. Jonathan Lethem has written 13 novels, among them Motherless Brooklyn, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award. His essays and stories are collected in 6 volumes. Clifford Thompson's collection, Love for Sale and Other Essays, received a Whiting Writers Award for nonfiction. He is the author of the memoir, Twin of Blackness, the novel Signifying Nothing, and the forthcoming What It Is, Race, Family, and One Thinking Black Man's Blues. Chris Ware is the author of Jimmy Corrigan, The Smartest Kid on Earth, Building Stories, and Rusty Brown. He has contributed comic strips and more than 24 covers to The New Yorker, and his work has been exhibited at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Los Angeles, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, and the Whitney Museum. A reminder that our guests tonight invite your questions. You can submit a question or comment at any time using the Q&A button on your menu bar. Please let us know where you're viewing from. And now, please welcome our panel, and I turn things over to our moderator, Andrew Blauner.
Thank you, Max. And thank you to everybody at Library of America, which in my view is not just the best publisher in America, but one of our great cultural institutions, which warrants your attention and support. My thanks too to the Schulz Museum and to Peanuts Worldwide, to all of my contributors here who I think of as friends and colleagues, and to all of you out there across the country and throughout the world, from what I understand, giving up part of your Wednesday night, which at least here is indeed appropriately a dark and stormy night. I am going to moderate this sort of as much as I so-called edited the book, which is to say, not very much. It's my job basically to get out of the way here, and it's like coaching an all-star team, and I just want to let everyone, when you have this much talent assembled, you sort of want to let them have at it. The only preface to that is the sort of origin story, which is a curious beginning, which is in 1996, I wrote to Charles Schulz about a project that I was representing, another anthology as it happened, asking if he would participate in it and write something. It was a book about men writing about the death of their mothers, which was a subject, if you know Schulz's biography, was very near and dear to him. I expected, there was no internet, at least for me at the time, I expected at best a nice form letter in the mail. And instead what I got was arguably the most polite declination one could possibly get. And with it, an invitation saying, if you ever find yourself in Santa Rosa, California, please come by. It would be nice to say hello. And you can imagine my response, other than thinking he mistakenly sent the note to the wrong person, except 2 years or so later, there I was in his office spending an afternoon in 1999, subsequent to which we became pen pals a little bit, and a seed was planted for this book on that afternoon, when I found him to be so gentle and kind and generous and authentic, and everything I think that most of us would imagine he might be. So my greatest thanks is to Charles Schulz. And with that, I just want to, again, just sort of open this up and get right into it. We're on the 70th anniversary of Peanuts, 20 years since Schulz died. But rather than take a sort of general approach, I'm going to start out asking everybody to talk about sort of their entry point. What was your introduction to the world of Peanuts? In some cases, you wrote about that in the book. In other cases, I think people would just love to hear kind of what that gateway was for you, when and how, and what it meant to you. So Sarah, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Well, I would have to say that it was with the paperback books that came out in the 60s, and also with the Valentines. For me, and then the next step, the Valentines were basically my gateway drug to Schulz. And also, I think that there was something kind of amazing about the way that Schulz actually marketed his stuff, which was, I mean, anybody who knows Charlie Brown knows that he never got any Valentines. And I know Chris Ware actually mentions that he felt so bad for Charlie Brown that he actually sent him a Valentine. But there's something about the merchandising that really was so involving. And I remember sending Valentines, Peanuts Valentines, to kids in my class, and I would sort of type them, you know, by, you know, give Linus to, I basically gave Linus and Snoopy to my favorites. And then, you know, everyone else, I tried to match, you know, whatever it was. But the thing was, is I felt like I was sort of engaging with this whole Charlie Brown, Snoopy world by giving out Valentines, deciding who gets which Valentine. And then I think with the plush Snoopy too, I think was really, for me, a way, I mean, there are many scenes with Charlie Brown where he is in bed with Snoopy, and Snoopy is having a lot of existential dread, or he's having World War I flashbacks or something. And Charlie Brown is actually not that nice to him, but to have the plush Snoopy to engage with that world was sort of like being in the world rather than, you know, just reading about it. So that would be my first.
And I apologize, you buried the lead. Did you want to introduce your friends there?
Oh, these are, yes, these are Snoopies that I picked up at Toy Tokyo. Different nationalities, but it basically, I mean, Snoopy took over the Peanut strip, as probably you all know, as the figure, the central figure, and became sort of world famous. And in fact, in Japan, when you go to the Peanuts, what is the Peanut store, they call it the Snoopy store. So this is my collection of Peanuts from different places, you know, Peru, Jamaica, Russia, you know, all that. Here they are, my friend.
Coincidentally or not, your piece in the book comes from a story you wrote about the narcissism of Snoopy.
Right. Absolutely.
You also, if I recall, you wrote the New York Times obituary for Schulz when he died.
Right. I did not get to meet him, however. I remember, rushing to finish all the obituary came with a sort of character portrait of each of the characters. Nobody would draw Peanuts after Schulz died. So basically the characters ended their lives at the same time that Schulz did. So I did basically a short obituary of every single character alongside the obituary of Schulz.
Well, sorry.
Which was quite moving for me, just to know that these kids would never do anything else that they hadn't already done. So.
And the cosmic karmic connection there was that Schulz had always said in a genuinely humble way that he didn't have much to say, that he thought people would care that much about. Everything he had to say, he said through the strip and through the characters,
right.
And vice versa. And here he died. Chris and others could probably authenticate this. I think within 24 hours of when the strip ended, he died, depending on which paper you were reading. So thank you, Sarah. Cliff, I'd like to go to you now to talk a little bit about your sort of entry point to the world of Peanuts, if you would.
Sure. Peanuts was really the first thing I read for pleasure. When I was starting to read, I was maybe 7, at the most 8 years old, and I had much older siblings, and my older brother had the paperback collections of Peanuts and in the basement, and I've spent many hours just reading and rereading those things. And I really kind of cut my teeth as a reader on those books. And I remember, I found the strip so funny, and I would, when I saw a strip I thought was just so brilliant, I would run and read it to whoever was nearby. I remember there's one where Charlie Brown and Linus are standing at the wall where they often hang out together, and Charlie Brown is talking about just like feeling out of place, and Linus says, well, I think we all have certain places where we feel out of place, and what is that? Where do you feel out of place? And Charlie Brown says, Earth, and I thought that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And to tell you where I was as a reader at that point, I pronounced the word certain curtain, right? And my parents said actually it's pronounced certain, and So really, Peanuts is kind of inseparable from just my process of reading for pleasure and learning to read and learning how to pronounce words, and so those figures were always. It's hard to remember a time when I didn't know about those characters. So I really grew up with them, and from about 1970 on, I'd say.
And just thank you for that. And just an addendum to that, I'd just say people sometimes seem curious how we go about choosing the contributors for these books. And in this case, both I asked Susan Cheever and Philip Lopate if they would contribute, and they both declined, and each individually suggested you need to talk to Cliff. Great writer for whom that means a great deal. So I'm grateful for the two of them. Jonathan, can we go to you now, please? And I'd be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about the approach that you did take to the piece that you wrote in the book.
Sure, yeah.
If you wouldn't mind, so I don't not do justice to it, could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure, but I don't want to be cheated of my question either. I'm glad everyone else has laid the track for this, because it's what's interesting is it's a newspaper strip, and I don't know, we'll hear from Chris, but I came to it by every means except the newspaper strip. It was this surrounding ambiance of Peanuts. There were posters in my friend's room one day. There was a Snoopy poster, and I remember the greeting cards, and of course the paperbacks. I was an eldest sibling, so I couldn't rely on I couldn't go to the basement. I had to notice them at friends' houses, because my parents weren't Peanuts people, I guess, or anyway, there weren't books around. But I absorbed so much of it before I ever even really completely grasped that it was a newspaper strip, because that whole phenomenon was a little esoteric to me. Uh, we didn't subscribe to a newspaper in my house, and the one that sometimes came in the door was the sober one without any cartoons in it. And so I learned about this kind of fundamental, this text of 4-panel newspapers. So I didn't even necessarily read them as taking place in, I mean, there was a 4-panel beat to the books, but so many of the stories were continuous. I read the panels, I'm a novelist now. I wanted there to be this, John. I love that you said at the beginning, the end of the largest story ever told by a human, because I did see it as this sort of massive story. And if I read through one of the paperbacks, I'd want to get the next one immediately, as if I was reading a story about, Tarzan or Nancy Drew or something. It was, what happened next? And then of course there were the TV specials, which became this version of a participation in American archetypal kid identity that was, in a way, it almost salvaged my sense of being an American kid, because I was so, as a growing up in New York City in the 70s, in communes with these parents who were so esoteric in so many ways, I didn't identify, Halloween was terrifying for me. Halloween in my neighborhood didn't work. It wasn't okay. And, so many other things were not, I didn't have the defaults inbuilt, but it's as though like, oh wait, Christmas, Halloween, this is how this works. And, Thanksgiving, I could understand my participation in a collective childhood by pretending I was having the Peanuts version of it every year by watching the special. And yeah, it was a lot of merchandise. It's funny, Sarah. It's like, it is this genius. I was going to make a joke when, if you'd made me last intern, I was going to say, well, it was the Schroeder cologne I wore to my, my high school prom that actually got me started. But it was, it seems such an offense to our notions of authenticity that something should ramify into so much product in so many different ways, but somehow it didn't. It fed back into the mystery of these characters. For me, ironically, I mean, you're sitting there with those plastic Snoopies. I felt that it wasn't that Schulz had sold out by making the extraneous material, the Valentines and the toys and the posters. It was that he'd sold out to Snoopy's vanity and let him take over the story, which I thought should be about these children. I felt, in a way, Snoopy began to stand between me and the true Peanuts. It was like he was this obstacle I had to look around to try to see what was going on with the deeper relationships, because he didn't have relationships. He was like a fourth wall breaker, and I didn't want him to do that.
Well, parenthetically, you talk about Snoopy standing in the way. I think there are some sort of Peanuts historians, or maybe some of you would say that the turning point in the strip, in the history of the strip, was when Schulz put Snoopy up on 2 legs instead of walking around like a dog. And you may know what year that was, Chris. You probably certainly know. But that was when things turned for better or worse, however you view it. And Jonathan, since you're maybe too modest to talk about your own piece, I'll just quickly read what Publishers Weekly wrote about your poem in the book called Grief. It said, a Peanuts referencing pastiche of Allen Ginsberg's landmark poem Howl is so perfect one could imagine a Beat, capital B, Linus, to whom it is dedicated, having written it.
That's nice. What's funny is just now you gave me this other idea when you said that the turning point in the strip is when he stands up on 2 legs. It's like a horror film in a way. Like, but it also it makes me want to dovetail that moment in Peanuts with Orwell's Animal Farm, to write Snoopy into Animal Farm.
4 legs good, 2 legs better. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Now, Mr.
Thanks.
Ware, among so many fascinating things you have said and written about Schulz, about Peanuts, you're just a endless font. One of them is that it's the only writer, I think, to paraphrase you, the only writer you've been reading your whole life. But I'll let you have the floor and take this open-ended question, talk about whatever you'd like to talk about here,
Well,
please.
you're very kind. Thank you very much. And thanks again for inviting me to this. I hope I won't ruin it or anything, but I actually came to Schulz in the basement as well, like Cliff did. I was a basement kid. I didn't have any siblings that were or older kids or anything, but I was kind of universally reviled at school. But I also came from a newspapering family. My grandfather was managing editor of the Omaha World Herald, and my mom was a reporter there. So newspapering was everywhere. I learned all of the horrible foul language I needed to know at about age 6 or so from my mom when she came home from work every day, and my grandfather as well. It's a good way to really appreciate language. And as the managing editor of the Omaha World Herald, he had been one of the first papers to add in peanuts. And he, as a result of that, had all of the original paperback editions of the books that were sent out by the syndicate to all the editors in his basement on the bookshelf. And I would go down there when I was bored as a kid, and he would be out working in the lawn with my grandmother and read the Peanuts books over and over and over again. And I puzzled over this over the years. And I think really the thing that I remember most about reading them is the reality that they seem to hold for me. Like the characters seem so undeniably real. Like they just burst to life on the page. You open those books and Linus and Charlie Brown and Lucy and Snoopy were alive in those books. And it was astonishing to me. And I didn't even really read them because they were funny or because they were well drawn or anything. It was just, there was life to them or something, and they felt like my friends. And I think that's a lot of what Schulz was able to impart in his comic strip, up beyond what a lot of what we maybe think was going on with it. I don't know. So, and then of course, the merchandising. I was born in 1967, so Peanuts was absolutely everywhere. I had one of the earliest Snoopy. I think it was a Knickerbocker. I don't even know what company. I don't think it even exists anymore. It had this sad little wind up thing in it that would play a little bedtime thing or something. It was definitely legitimate licensed Snoopy, and I hugged it so much I broke its neck. And my grandmother had to wrap up Snoopy's neck with this kind of a tourniquet or something other, because his head would flop over because I was always hugging it so hard. So I actually, the moment that Snoopy changed to sorry, I didn't mean to authoritative, but so, I don't know if it was standing up. I think it was the thought balloon when Snoopy first started thinking. And it's, you think who is he thinking to? He's not talking to anyone. He's talking to himself. He's talking to the reader through his thoughts. And it occurred to me recently, actually, you always think the most defining characteristic of Peanuts is that there's no adults in it. It suddenly hit me the other day when I was thinking about this, that's not true. There is an adult in it. It's Snoopy. Snoopy is the adult in the strip. He's never identified as such, but if you think about it, he's got these adult inclinations, these adult thoughts, and he kind of lives apart. It's like the one way that an adult consciousness kind of, in a way, it's it really kind of, I don't think it blew the strip apart. I think it actually coalesced it in a way, but I don't could be wrong. You could talk about this stuff forever. So anyway, I'm going on too long. Sorry.
Not at all. And I think, Chris, you were the one who told me that it's almost like a trivia answer. The only character whose parent ever appeared in the strip.
Oh, was
Snoopy, yes?
I think, well, yeah, actually, maybe that's true. Now, did I tell you that?
We talked about other grown-ups being in the strip, which is a shock to people. And some of the short-lived courtships and romances that took place in the strip that people have forgotten about, because we always think about the unrequited love stories.
Right. Well, it's always off panel, if I can use that word. Like Miss Othmar. I loved Miss Othmar, even though she was just a word, Miss Othmar. I love Miss Othmar as much as Linus loved Miss Othmar. Sorry.
I'd like to speak about the unrequited loves in there. So you've got so many tales of unrequited love. You've got, Sally's for Linus, Lucy's for Schroeder. You have Marcy's for maybe Charlie Brown or maybe Peppermint Patty. But the two male Loves, which is Linus for Mrs. Othmar. Is it Mrs. or Miss Othmar?
It was
I don't know.
off Marianne, but yeah.
Yeah, and or Charlie Brown for the little
red-haired girl. Yeah.
But those you never see. Why is it that you never see the female objects of love? And there's one line that sticks in my mind where Charlie Brown says, "She's really something and I am nothing," when in fact it's the exact opposite. I am something and she is nothing in the strip. I mean, to us, she is, you know, he's living in his head as far as we know.
What's in your left hand, Sarah?
What?
What's in your left hand?
This is my plush doll, which has been through hell and back.
Wow.
Yes, I
Well
hate to say it. He was abused by my dog in a most lewd way. And anyway, I took him to college. My one stuffed animal I took to college. So yeah.
Wow.
I wasn't going to bring it out. It's just too disreputable and sad. And but you know, when Chris was talking about taping up the neck, well, I actually had to go to Build-A-Bear and have them, you know, redo it.
Well, I don't know if there's anything to this. I've noticed, I mean, my son is 6 and he has one like that, and the neck is, I don't know if they're actually constructed in a way where the head is a little too heavy for the neck, because I remember that happened to mine as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's to make you buy another one.
Exactly, right.
Yeah. My Snoopy was actually 4 legs. It was so early.
Oh.
Position like an actual dog. So
What was it made of?
it wasn't.
Plastic?
Yeah.
And Chris, don't you also have a Charlie Brown figurine where he is not wearing the yellow zigzag shirt? I think he's wearing a red shirt. I think.
Oh yeah, that's one of those weird kind of cheap plastic things that seems like it might be poisonous or something, like off-gassing or something. I think there were like Hungerford Plastics, which was an offshoot of Goodrich Tires or something. And then on the second one, they have these little cloth shirts and stuff, and they're, yeah, I don't know if they're gonna last much longer. They seem to be kind of slightly just crumbling or something. So try not to. I don't hug those, that's for sure. Yeah.
Well,
Chris,
if you can.
Sorry.
Cliff, go ahead, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to talk to Chris's point about the adult presence in the strip, because I was rereading your essay, and you talked about how the strip kind of evokes there's this timelessness because they, you know, the characters never get older, and that really made me think, and it made me think that like as you do get older, one thing you notice as you get older is you know, whether you're like 15 or 55, you always feel like you, right? You don't feel like somebody else when you get older. You always feel like you. So in a way, it's almost like the characters in Peanuts it's like maybe they are adults, but we're seeing the way they see themselves, right? So maybe they're, you know,
Yeah.
I think like it's a strip about adults that look like who look like children. You know?
Well, Schulz really captured this weird thing that we all do mentally too, which is like when we remember our childhoods, we envision it with ourselves as as we are now in them. Like, and you see a picture of you with your friends at age 12, and you're like, oh my God, I was actually age 12 then. And you think, oh, did I really look that way?
Right.
We edit our memories in such a way. And I think he captured some strange kind of like epistemological lie that we all do or something, and made it kind of a driving force behind the strip or something. So made it real or concrete or so, I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, there's a remark Andy Warhol made in his one of his books about advice that if you make yourself look like a very old man when you're in your early 20s, then you never will appear to age, which is sort of what Andy Warhol did. And there's a kind of Charlie Brown, Andy Warhol convergence where it's like if you're bald with one little curl on top and you just have a sad furrowed expression forever, then you'll appear never to age. And it worked for both of them.
Yeah, right. Well, Nabokov said, I've quoted this before, that we all have a child buried alive inside of us, which is kind of grim but true too.
Yeah.
The comics historian Bill Blackbeard said that basically the history of comics before the Second World War was adults acting like children, and after the Second World War it was children acting like adults. This really kind of applies to pretty much everything if you think about it. So the Cats were kids, and then Peanuts was the flip.
Yeah.
Can we just pivot to sort of going around the horn here about who your alter ego would be among Peanuts characters, and why? And Sarah, let's go back to you on that, please.
Well, I think it was definitely Linus to start out with, because I also had that sort of blanket fixation and you know, trouble with my older sibling, you know, very much identified as being kind of squashed by the elders, I think, yeah, he would definitely be it. I think one of my favorite lines is when Lucy's tormenting Linus, and Linus goes into the kitchen to get away from his sister, who's just haranguing him. And she said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Am I buttering too loud for you?" And this is one of my favorite lines. And so, yeah, it's got to be Linus.
Cliff?
Yeah, I would say I would give two answers. Like, there's Charlie Brown was definitely the character I identified with, because you know he was just kind of out of step with the world and the kids around him, and I definitely felt that way as a kid when I was reading about him. So he was the character I felt I was. Linus was the character I wanted to be, you know, because Linus was just so cool, you know.
And he's
was
sarcastic.
Really, well, he's sarcastic, but he's also smart, and he had the he just had the feel. I mean, Lucy aside, he was just able to take care of himself a little better than Charlie Brown was, and really, he's the only character who's nice to Charlie Brown, you know. So it was like he was kind, and he kind of knew how to get along in the world. You know, he had his blanket, but he could do amazing things with it. You know, he depended on it, but it could do all kinds of stuff, right? So, you know, you know, we all started watching the Charlie Brown Christmas pretty early on, and of course, you know, at the end of at the sort of climax of a Charlie Brown Christmas, I mean, it's the Linus show. You know, he's the one who knows what's going on. So it was kind of I like the, you know, and I just like the Charlie Brown Linus friendship, and so they were definitely, you know, one was who I was, and the other was kind of who I aspired to be.
Thanks. Jonathan, are you?
Yeah, I'm nodding along because I think Cliff kind of nails that aspirational, you know, I wanted to be adored the way I adored Linus, and I wanted to be cute the way I felt readers, you know, you kind of feel the collective, you know, I don't know, there's just something that and the Christmas special is a part of it. There's something about Linus where it's like he's the always emergent underdog. You know, Linus is going to turn out to be the author of it later. He's, you know, Linus is a little bit like Holden Caulfield or something, right? He's, you know, you think he's going to write the book later. He's going to go through some stuff and be underrated for a long time, and then everyone's going to think eventually, oh, it was all about him. It was all about Linus. But I couldn't get into an honest identification with him, partly because, as I said, I was an older sibling, and he's structured so totally as the younger than, and so I ended up, and I could, but see, I can't. I wasn't as honest as Cliff. I couldn't be Charlie Brown. I wasn't willing to be Charlie Brown. I had to reserve a part of me that was like also impatient with or exasperated with Charlie Brown, and found him impossible the way the community of children did. And so I ended up really weirdly with like a Schroeder thing where I was like, I'm that kid. I'm a little to one side. I'm the artist, and she loves me, but I'm ignoring her.
Thanks. And Chris?
Well, I kind of agree with everyone. I mean, I could say Shermie just to be obscure or something. He's kind of like actually.
Yeah, I was thinking no one would say Linus.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I loved Linus. I think the thing I loved most about Linus was that he was so vulnerable when his blanket was taken away. It really was the way I felt, like, you know, about like hugging the Snoopy doll or something, that he was really just so immediately just it fell apart. And that, you know, Lucy torturing him by putting it in the dryer, I found that just really painful to read. So I read it over and over and over again, you know, and I felt the most empathy, I think, for Charlie Brown, because he, you know, didn't get Valentines and stuff. And I really, you know, sent him a Valentine because it just seemed so sad. I love Snoopy. I mean, you know, and when I think about it, it's like I love them all. I identified with them all. And that's the weird part of the strip, is that when you're reading it, you can kind of, you know, you can think, yeah, Lucy, right. Yeah, go for it. You know, or like, yeah, Schroeder, you give her what for, you know, you realize like it's the whole strip is one thing, and it's Charles Schulz basically that we're all identifying with, you know. So as Art Spiegelman said to me a long time ago, he's like, it's like Schulz took apart his personality and the little tiny people and just let them go at each other for 50 years or something. And that's kind of what it feels like. It's like you're seeing into Schulz's biography, but it's told in a strange, it's completely organic and not planned in any way, and that's what makes it so human and real and moving. I mean, you know, we always talk about, when we talk about Peanuts, really the kind of sadness and pain in it, but when you read it, you kind of have to, you can't really put your finger on it, but it's there. It's throughout the entire thing, but it's not pointable, toable necessarily. So I think it's
I would like to speak up for the female characters, which I think this is one of the amazing things that I've come to see about Schulz's work, is that he drew fantastic girl characters. I mean, they're just great. And as I get older, I feel more like Lucy and more like Sally and more like those guys than I do like Linus. And their rage, one of my favorite panels has Linus again trying to make Lucy feel better. He's giving her snacks and bringing her things, and finally she shouts out and says, "I don't want to feel better." And and the other thing that I love about Lucy in particular is that Schulz, you know, reserved a certain pen nib for her yelling that was very, very broad and energetic, you know, and I love that there was reserved for that pitch of anger and rage, one pen nib, you know. I don't know. I just wanted to speak out. We're talking about, you know, Snoopy, Charlie Brown, Linus, Shermie. So I just thought I'd give a shout out to the gals, you know.
Yeah, I definitely have Lucy days. I could have just flipped the other way and named her as my point of identification. Once I slipped off, you know, kidding myself that I could be Linus, I almost, you know, it's almost like a reverse polarity. I almost flipped into, oh yeah, I'm that slightly mean older sibling, and I feel Lucy all the time.
One thing about Sarah, I loved your line in your essay about how Lucy basically is society, right? Yeah. You know, Lucy is the things that we all have to contend with, and it's interesting, like reading, you know, seeing Lucy on the page and hearing and seeing her yell and shout and everything, and it's funny, and it's, you know, it's endearing until you remember like the people in your life who are like Lucy, you know, male or female. They're not fun to be around. You know, so it's like, you know, it's funny, but I mean, like Lucy is funny, but it really is kind of it really stands for some just not fun parts of life, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And yet, isn't it we watched the Charlie Brown Thanksgiving over that holiday, and I was reminded, sort of shocked to see the act of kindness that Lucy performs, which is so rare for her. I mean, we only see her vulnerable when she's trying to get Schroeder's attention and affection. But the scene, if you can see it in your mind's eyes, or if you go watch it, when I guess Sally has given up on Linus in the pumpkin patch, and he's shivering, and I don't know if he's half asleep, and Lucy comes out and puts her arm around him, walks him back into the house, and sort of the most poignant of all, and I think people have written about this, or knows, takes his shoes off and puts him into bed. And, you know, it's sort of very Peanuts in a way, right? It's like, everything seems sort of simple, but it's much more complicated and paradoxical than that.
Yeah, I think Rick Moody wrote about that in his essay for your book, right?
I think that's exactly where it must have been. Rick Moody has, like a lot of us, I think, is re-experiencing a Peanuts life through our children. And we're so used to people sort of gravitating toward the Great Pumpkin or the Christmas special. Rick's daughter happens to have a virtual obsession with the Thanksgiving special, which I think he said she's seen 175 times or something like that.
My son was traumatized by the Thanksgiving special. I can't remember why, but.
Well, I mean, there's so much to cover, and let's just sort of go from there. Speaking of the Thanksgiving special, something has come up. I mean, there've been two sort of mini controversies that led to, I think, Charlie Brown or Peanuts trending on Twitter in the last week or so. One of which raises this question of of how Franklin is treated, specifically in the Thanksgiving special, but also sort of more globally like that. And was Schulz being, I think the word that's being tossed around is tokenist when he did that. And people are sort of re-examining all that. I don't want to go around with everyone, but if anyone has something to weigh in on that, I think, and, you know, just as quick background is Franklin came into being, I think it was a woman, a school teacher in LA named Harriet Glickman, who wrote a letter to Charles Schulz in 1968, given everything that was going on there, saying, I think it would be good for the culture for children to have a Black character. And Schulz being Schulz, and Chris and Jonathan and all of you could testify to this, as far as Schulz's mindset, and say he wasn't really open to suggestions. And in fact, if you suggested something, it was almost surefire he wasn't going to do it. But in this case, Franklin came about because of this letter that the school teacher wrote. So I'm curious if any of you have any thoughts or have given any meditation to that issue.
Well, yeah, the thing about, I mean, you could say that Franklin was a token, and it'd be hard to argue with you, but I was glad he was there for one reason, which is that yeah, when you read, especially like older literature, when I read older literature, if a Black character is introduced, I kind of hold my breath because I don't know how they're going to be treated, and I don't know how I'm going to feel about the book from that point on. You know, I've had, you know, I've read books that I was enjoying up until they introduced a Black character, and then, you know, that in such a demeaning way that it's hard to kind of see the book the same way after that. So it was good. I mean, I like the fact that Franklin was there and just was treated like just another kid, and so, you know, it's almost better not to have any Black characters, and let me just like kind of pretend they're going to be treated well, unless, you know, it's better that than to have them mistreated. But you know, the ideal thing is to have them there and have them treated as equals, and I felt like that happened with Franklin. So yeah.
Yeah,
Chris,
I think Schulz really tried to do, you know, the best that he could and to do the right thing, you know. And it's like, as cartoonists especially, like when you're dealing in a language that is seeing first and reading second, or reading pictures, you're dealing with something that's from the outside in. And Schulz's real innovation, if not really genuine insight into comics and even the way that we read pictures and make pictures come alive in our minds, is he was able to imbue them with an empathy, so that you read not only care for the characters, the drawings, but you feel through the characters too. So the feelings of the characters then become your own as well. So he literally was, his innovation in comics was to figure that out. And there's no way that whatever has been done in comics since could have ever been done without that sense of empathy and that sense of what I think of as an inside outness of the page. Because in comics, there's the perfect language for telling stupid jokes and making fun of people. You got a little box with a little helpless person, and you're like, do whatever you want to him, you can, whatever, you know. And it's like, which you can see in the history of comics, was everything was made fun of or denigrated. It was a perfect way for the American ruling class to make fun of whatever they felt threatened by or make hateful drawings of. And Schulz took that language and that history and through maybe just an intuitive gentleness on his part, was able to turn it around and to turn it into something that was the closest thing to literature that had ever been, I think. So, and in that, I think Franklin is as much a part of that as everything else. So,
Well, I think Mona Simpson actually
Oh.
put it pretty well in the essay, where she said somehow Schulz moved from pow to wah, you know, some from the external sort of whatever was going on, sort of war action comics, into the internal drama and as you put it, empathy. Yeah.
and I think didn't Miss Glickman, she died this in April, actually.
Yeah.
Didn't she? Yeah, there was a whole obituary devoted to her, which I thought was really nice. So,
Exactly. And she wrote to other cartoonists as well, not just Schulz, but
Yeah.
that's when she died. I have, Jonathan, unless you have something on this, I have so many more questions, as I'm sure you have, but I think we do want to give the audience out there a chance to raise some
Yeah.
questions of their own, if that's
Audience
okay with all
questions
of
would
you.
be great.
And one of the themes that looks like is represented by a note from Kath Sparks of Nashville, Tennessee, who asks about the role of Schulz's religious faith in Peanuts storylines and characters. And several other people have asked similar types of questions. So that seems like a good one, especially given the season. And I just open that up to any of you who want to take that on.
you know, Sarah's like, no way, not me.
Well, Schulz was, of course, a deeply religious man, for at least for most of his life. And I feel like the moral principles are kind of implicit rather than explicit. There's that one strip, that one Sunday strip that ran where I think Sally comes home to Charlie Brown, and she has to tell him something, and they sneak around to go where nobody can hear them, and she says, "We prayed in school today," and Charlie Brown is just like horrified. And I that's the only reference to religion I know about. I don't know, Chris, you might have a.
I think that's true, actually. And Schultz said that both sides of the argument like tried to get him to sign up to their charter over that. Like he had kept it so human, basically, that they were able to see themselves in both sides. So, I mean, he tithed a good portion of his income to the Church of God for a number of years, and then when he moved to California, as far as I understand it, then kind of distanced himself from it a little bit. And later in his life, he described himself as a secular humanist. But there's no doubt that he found a comfort in religion, and I think it informed his character, but also reflected his character too in a lot of ways. So he's just a decent, dignified human being. You know, there's such a lack of those. It seems like lately, you know, like. And I'm not religious at all in any manner, shape or form or anything, but like Beethoven and maybe Schulz or some of the few artists I can think of, it make me start to feel like, oh, maybe I should be or something like that. But
Well, Chris, you've likened Schulz to Fred Rogers, I think, in some venues or contexts, right? As far
I mean, I think they're kind of seen as the same way. They're both like, and weirdly, they're like both like, I think, lifelong Republicans, you know, like, which is interesting. Like, I really feel like Schulz is one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, you know, and I would put Fred Rogers right up there too. I think they were wonderful human beings, but then you think like, you know, like lately that party's not exactly making a name for itself as far as decency goes, or that's putting it very mildly, to be fair. But they just, it was a model person and a model human being as far as an empathetic human. He's a gentle person. I mean, if the more you learn about the difficulties in his life and stuff, you know, he was obviously trying to overcome certain things, but we all do. So
I was surprised to learn that he was a Republican. I did note somewhere he said he regretted not voting for Kennedy in 1960. And also it's very sort of manifest in the literature about Peanuts that every president, I think from Nixon through Obama, irrespective of their party affiliation, was like in some cases a devout Peanuts fan, especially Obama and Reagan as well, for that matter. Jonathan, you want to get in here?
I was going to say something odd, which is I remember when I came across it was again like an artifact, a spin-off. There was a kind of a Christian Peanuts thing, a book that mimicked that, physically wanted to smuggle itself into the Peanuts collection. I think it was one of the lengthwise formats, but it was all homilies. And for that reason, I think I associated this with, in a way, it was like Christianity was an aspect of the merchandising ring that surrounded, it was like Hallmark wants a piece of this action. They want to ride the love train of Peanuts, and so does Jesus Christ. And who wouldn't want to buy in and get some of that aura loaned to them? I think it was almost the opposite of that effect that I had as a kid when I was informed that Narnia was all a Christian allegory, where it seemed to suddenly go, the insight or the reveal seemed to go burrowing straight into the core of the content, where I saw it all differently. This was like as you say, the human, depth, the intimacy of Peanuts was much too essential for any ideological thing to stick to it. It was only kind of just dancing around its periphery. And I just, hearing that he was Christian, or just now as I'm hearing, because I didn't know that he was Republican, it sort of seems just strangely like the artwork contains its own truth that makes that so inconsequential.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think there was a book, The Gospel According to Peanuts.
I think that's the thing that the object that I was thinking of. Yeah.
It's like a 4-volume thing.
Also, oh, sorry.
Copies.
No.
Yeah, I mean, his first job was lettering Catholic comics for, a Catholic publisher in St. Paul. And then he, for like an unbelievable amount of time, he did this weird gag panel. I mean, if you could consider a gag panel of teenagers for a Christian magazine. It was like Christian jokes for teenagers up until I think the 60s. And he did it in addition to Peanuts.
What are they like?
They're weird. It's weird. It's like you took, Sally and Violet and extruded them or something and made them make jokes about the Bible. It's very strange.
Yeah.
But I mean, he felt like, he agreed to do it and he just kept doing it. It was his, it was not unusual either. That was a pretty typical thing for cartoonists to do like a sub feature just to get some extra money to pay the mortgage or something, which needless to say, he did not need to do. But he did.
Thinking about Schulz and Christianity, I mean, the world of Peanuts is not my picture of what a Christian world is. I mean, it's these kids are super cruel to each other, and they're all basically solitary, uncomforted people who cope with survival in the best way they can. But I wouldn't say that they are people, except for in the Christmas special, I think is actually a real departure for Schulz. I think the basic, if I were to think about what I would see as the philosophical outlook, it is actually kind of bleak and one of existential dread. It's not what you think of as a Christian world. I think that's just my impression of it. But I think that Charlie Brown Christmas really turned people's heads in a different way. To think that it was.
Another question. Bill Bridges from Stone Mountain, Georgia asks, are any of the panelists sincere enough to see The Great Pumpkin?
I plead the fifth.
Does that mean yes?
That means I plead the fifth.
That's definitely still
Yes, I guess a rhetorical question. Edward Hall of Atlanta, Georgia says this could be sort of a speed round question. Could panelists identify a favorite Schulz strip?
God. I like the one where it's just weird because I'll try to remember them and I'll think, oh, Lucy said this, and I'll find the strip and it's like Sally or something. I've completely reimagined it. I have a terrible memory or something. But the one I think where Linus possibly, or maybe it's Charlie Brown, they're looking at the stars and the punchline is, I'm going to walk over here so I can see it a little better.
I saw one the other night where anybody remember this? Snoopy and Lucy are arm wrestling.
Oh,
And
yeah.
Snoopy and the drawings, the drawings in that strip are just hilarious. They're just so funny. So that's what comes to mind.
I think one of my favorites is Sally and Charlie Brown and Snoopy are all at the dinner table together, and Sally is complaining she doesn't want to eat with a dog, and Snoopy in his thought balloon says, "By the way, that's your butter plate on the left." She's eating off his plate, and so I thought that was great.
Someone in the chat put in one of my absolute favorites, where Lucy's. I love when they go on kind of rhapsodic tangents about things that aren't real, and Lucy sees what she thinks is a beautiful butterfly from Brazil on the sidewalk, and she's musing on the kind of the how strange it is for a beautiful thing to come all the way from Brazil just to die on a sidewalk in her neighborhood, and someone says it's actually a potato chip, and she says, well, I wonder how that potato chip got all the way here from Brazil. It's like the quintessence of cognitive dissonant thinking, right? Like it's still from Brazil. Right. It may not be a butterfly, but I made it from Brazil and now it is.
Well, speaking of Brazil, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing the name, Erico de Assis from Brazil asks, what is the meaning of life according to Peanuts?
Oh boy, that's your job. You're the editor. I would say it's just to be a decent, kind human being and be understanding and don't be mean. It's pretty simple. It's it's spent all this time trying to figure it out. But it's everything keeps coming back to that. It seems like to me. So, but it's not clever, but. What do you guys think?
Well, so in a pretty mean world, it's very easy to get along by being mean, but I guess that the hard and the right thing is to try to find another way. That's
a good way to put it. Yeah. Oh, he's cutting us off.
That seemed like a cue somehow. I don't know that. Anyway, it seems like a good place to end with the meaning of life. What better place to end? Thank you so much, you guys. That was really, really great.
Thank you.
And thank you, Andrew,
Thank all of you.
Yes, I was so flattered to be here. Thank you, Andrew.
Me too.
Me too.
Great pleasure.
So, to the audience, you've been listening to Sarah Boxer, Jonathan Lethem, Clifford Thompson, Chris Ware, and Andrew Blauner discuss the genius and enduring appeal of Charles Schulz's Peanuts. These panelists are among the 33 contributors to the Peanuts papers, writers and cartoonists on Charlie Brown, Snoopy and the Gang, and The Meaning of Life, edited by Andrew Blauner. A Library of America special publication, and it's still a couple of weeks to Christmas. I'm obliged to say, it's the publisher talking. This concludes LOA Live's 2020 season. Thanks so much to all of you for joining us this year and helping to make this new virtual series a success. It's been great these last 9 months to have this new way to stay connected to old friends and to make some new ones around the country and around the world. We'll resume early in the new year with more programs inspired by LOA volumes that bring gifted American writers, literary scholars, and historians directly to you. I hope you'll join us. Details about upcoming LOA Live events can be found on our website, loa.org, where you'll also find information about the Peanuts papers and links to purchase that and other volumes of great American writing. You'll also find recordings of tonight's and previous LOA Live events. Thanks so much again to our star-studded panel tonight, and warmest and best wishes to you all for the holidays and for the new year.